it goes without saying that the processes that exist today were not designed for agents to begin with, because there was no concept of a thinking agent till very recently.
But Vijay, just to take things a little further, is this the agentic AI world basically saying, okay, you have a process and we are going to put AI around it? Or is it time for an enterprise to look at the process differently because you have the agentic world?
Now we have this idea that agents can think like a human, so a lot of corner cases that historically we could not solve now are relatively simple to solve, because now you have a thinking machine going after it.
Vijay, welcome to the CAIO podcast. We are thrilled to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sanjay. Thrilled to be here.
So, Vijay, we have a global audience, audiences of peers of yours, people aspiring to be your peers, and people who are interested in AI, enterprise AI. Just give a very brief background on what Genpact is, because there are a lot of people who might not know what Genpact is.
Yeah, so Genpact has been around for around 30 years, right? About 20 years as a public company, when sometime before that as well, right? So it's a spin-off from General Electric, which started off by focusing on the GE company's back office, right? Optimizing the processes and so on. Became a public company, right? Then the thesis became, hey, if we can do it really well for ourselves, why not do it for others as well? Now we are a little over $5 billion in revenue, 140 odd thousand people. We work in like 30 odd countries. The CEO works out of New York. I live in Phoenix. We have a large presence in India and several other countries. What we are very good is in walking into a CXO's office and say something along the lines of, hey, your GNA or COGS is at X percentage of your revenue. We have 30 years of expertise in bringing it down, right? In bringing productivity to that. And we have many different levers, a lot of process knowledge that we have gained over time, a lot of AI knowledge that we now have, etc. And we can underwrite an outcome for you that, yeah, like an example would be, hey, your cost per invoice is $5 today. We think we can make it $3, and we are willing to put money and mouth together, right? As in, we can guarantee that outcome, right? We can underwrite that outcome. So that's how we go about our business.
Is it that I will produce so much value for you and you pay me based on value kind of a model?
That's essentially the crux of our existence, right? We work on outcomes. That's what there are some clients who choose to buy labor, right, or capacity. Our preference is to work on outcomes, right? Because we have so much of institutional knowledge that we have gained over a period of time, right? On the last mile knowledge of every process that is not codified in, ERPs and so on, which we bring to bear, and that's how we build that productivity. And that's what differentiates us, in my opinion, right? Having been in and around this industry for a while. So software companies generally charge per seat, right? And services companies charge for labor, whether it is software services or legal or whatever, right? I mean, it's typically has been a billable hour. We think that we can stand behind an outcome, so that the client knows exactly what they are getting, and if they're not getting value, then they shouldn't be spending on it, right? So, but we are flexible to the extent that, we are not naive to think that every client, every partner we work with will do that. But this is what we lead with, right? That we are willing to stand behind it, and most clients do find value in that model.
Pricing of agents, AI agents, is a big question mark right now. And how do you price them? Salesforce, has agent force, etc. Are you willing to take the AI agent model and also say, I'm ready to do it outcome based? Or is it possible to do an AI agent outcome based model?
Yes. So the way we are doing that is no longer as bespoke projects. We are building a suite of products, like where we started with accounts payable last year, and then the next one to come would be like record to report. We already have deductions. We'll build other things like procurement and insurance, bind and post bind. So things that we know how to do well, that we have done for decades, we are productizing all of it, and we will stand behind outcomes, right? We are absolutely happy to stand behind outcomes, and where we cannot, we are happy to do custom builds for our clients, right? If the client wants to own the IP, or we are not clear about what the outcome is, or the client is still experimenting, we are happy to meet them where they are, right? It's not like we are walking away from anything, right? But absolutely right, our thesis on agentic AI is productized agentic AI, which we are willing to stand behind an outcome, which I think is fairly differentiating in today's market.
You made me think in terms of revenue models for companies like you or Agent Force or things of that nature. Uh, when companies are implementing AI agents, how should they be looking at a cost for themselves?
So I would divide this into two questions. One, AI is fast developing, right? So every week something or the other is happening, right? So I have to spend 8 hours a week um, to keep up with the technology, right? And I'm no longer a full-time developer, coding for a living. But even then, I have to spend about 8 hours every week reading, coding, etc., to stay on top, right? And the reason I mentioned that is so you cannot avoid an experiment setup in your AI journey, right? Because things are changing so fast. You should have some amount of your time, money, employees, etc., dedicated to that. Otherwise, you'll miss on important. I'm a big fan of having a business case and holding technology to a high standard in meeting that business case. So, like for example, I've worked with clients a lot, right? This life and prior life, where I would hear things like, oh, my immediate objective is to put 5 AI projects into production. I'm like, to what end? So, to the extent that you're prototyping something because of that experimental nature, sure, you should keep experimenting all the time. But by putting 5 AI agents into production, you haven't proven anything, right? Other than you have satisfied some technical curiosity at the most, right? So, I'm not a big fan of objectives like that. I would much rather take a stance that, okay, my underwriting cost is X million dollars, and can I use this technology to take out 20%? Or because my underwriting process is so slow, I can only handle so many policies in a given period. Will AI make it faster so I can increase my top line by 20%? This is how I would define the success of AI, as in there should be some core business benefit that comes out of that, either by improving top line and growing the business that way, or by improving bottom line and making it a more profitable way to do it, right? So that is a much better way of measuring your success than in terms of measuring velocity and number of projects and so on. I think that world is kind of behind us. So index on the purpose, which is how does it benefit the business, then work yourself backward to see if the technology can solve it.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. You have 30 years of institutional knowledge within this organization. And there are consulting organizations like McKinsey, BCG, etc., who have much larger, essential body of learning, etc. Is that something that can be used, as data, etc., to be do a better job, as you kind of hinted at, uh, for your clients?
I would never violate a data usage agreement that I have with the client, right? Think about where AI learns from, right? So there are three major buckets, right? Just to simplify, there's data, right? All the transactional knowledge that you have, right? Then there is the process knowledge, right? All the standard operating procedures and blueprints and so on, right? Very assorted Visio diagrams and so on. And then there is the tacit knowledge, which are only in the brains of employees, which you have to glean by looking at how they work a problem, right? Things that are not documented anywhere. It is not captured in an ERP or a CRM or anything. So, we in Genpact, we call it fingerprints. So these three things together is essentially the corpus of knowledge that AI needs. And since we have done this for 30 years, we have a lot of that available to us, right? 80% of all processes are happy flows that, an SAP or an Oracle will anyway do uh, lights out, right? So everything that a company like Genpact does is somewhat of an exception. So then the question is, do we have enough knowledge to then take that 20% and solve 80% of that problem with agents, because now agents can think, right? So historically, the challenge was software was very deterministic, right? So you can only tackle the things that had some kind of if this then do that kind of logic. Now we have this idea that agents can think like a human. So a lot of corner cases that historically we could not solve now are relatively simple to solve, because now you have a thinking machine going after it. And our thesis is that we can solve a good bit of those problems with agents. And we already have some validation because our accounts payable suite that we released last year, clients are already getting that benefit already, right? We know they are realizing the value because we are making that money, and clients are getting that productivity, right? So there is some validation that this thesis holds true.
But Vijay, just to take things a little further, I mean, you said the process. Is this the agentic AI world basically saying, okay, you have a process and we are going to put AI around it? Or is it time for an enterprise to look at the process differently because you have the agentic world? What is your approach? Are you taking an existing process and saying, okay, I'll give you an agent who'll go from A, who's outcome based, this, that, or you're saying your process actually needs to be improved? This is the opportunity to do it.
It goes without saying that the processes that exist today were not designed for agents to begin with, because there was no concept of a thinking agent till very recently, right? Till the last couple of years, right? So the closest was a human agent working with a co-pilot of some kind, right? Where there's a chatbot that can give quick answers, right? That kind of. So it's pretty much a given that because there was no such possibility, there are no existing workflows that are optimized for agents. So first thing to do is to rethink the workflow itself. So there are many things that we do today because there was just no other way of handling. But because agents have this ability to think, more and more things can go into a lights out operation, right? Lights out essentially means without a human being needing to touch it. And then we have a hardcore requirement that things that need a human, right? So the example I often use is agents and special agents. So think about any society, right? So I live in Chandler, Arizona. So we live with the US Constitution, a bunch of state laws and city regulations and so on. But the fact that there are laws doesn't mean that everybody follows those laws. So you need cops on the street to make sure that, there is a noise complaint, somebody goes and checks on it. There's DUI, somebody goes and checks on it, so on and so forth, right? So there are some cops that make sure that the day-to-day enforcement of laws happen. I'm a bad guy. I did something mischievous, and then I started driving my car, and I drive to California, which is the neighboring state, right to my west. If I cross over, then the Arizona cop who is running behind me cannot cross over and arrest me because that cop doesn't have jurisdiction in California. But if it is an FBI agent, FBI agent has jurisdiction in every state, right? So FBI agent can cross and get a hold of me as the bad guy, which is why we call them special agents, right? Agents are like the street cops, right? They enforce the law as is written, but they have very defined jurisdiction in what they can do. Special agents are the humans who work with these agents who have more jurisdiction, as in cross jurisdictional power. So when agents cannot do something, they step in and do it, or they can validate. Another example would be, just because a cop arrested you doesn't mean that you're guilty. There is still a judge, right, who determines whether or a jury, right, that determines that you're guilty. That kind of thing is also left to the human user. FBI is only useful if the regular cop is able to take care of all the data. If FBI had to write traffic tickets and check on noise complaints, this system will not work, right? Because the FBI agent is much better trained and a lot more expensive, um, because they have to solve very complex problems, right? So that is where humans have to get to, and all the other things, right? Like the equivalent of the street cop enforcing laws as is written, AI agents can do, right? So that is how I think of how this world will evolve.
Do you think AI agents also at some point can become special agents too?
AI agents will get better over time.
But they're
Like,
not there
there's
yet.
no
They're
question.
not there yet. Yes.
And no agent will be, and they have to get continuously better, right? Industry still has various different points of view. My point of view on that is agents have to continuously become better. Just as a human being, right? Why do people get promoted after some time in a job? It's because they get better and they can do more things, higher order problems, and then they can delegate to um, less experienced people. So the future largely is agents getting smarter over time. And for some more complicated problems, a supervisor, much like a manager, can delegate it to five people in her team. A supervisor agent should be able to spawn off small agents who can go do defined tasks really well and come back. And this paradigm is already there, right? This pattern of supervisory agents is already there. But this is where the world will get to, right? As in, it's not mainstream yet. It is technically possible, but this is very well utilized in like um, AI for coding, right? Because nobody sits and codes and then creates tests and so on anymore. Like every morning, right? I come in and check whether the agents I spawned off the previous night finished what I asked them to do. This pattern will start becoming more and more prevalent in business processes also. I'll tell you the thought process behind it, right? It's not like people who don't have agentic in their title are not doing agentic work, right? The way the CAIO role kind of um, grew, right, over the last few years is AI does a lot of different things. And depending on the use case, different people in the organization own different parts of AI. That's the only pragmatic way of making it work. And the CAIO becomes like the orchestrator, the policy creator, and so on, right? I have to do all those things too, but except with agentic AI, AI is no longer an advisor. AI is the doer, right? And humans are the governors, right? The people who govern them, who correct them, and so on. So this is now an execution path. It is a new way of working, which means the PNL structures will eventually evolve into having digital labor and human labor working together. So this is why we thought, right, that, or my boss thought at least, that it deserves its own special title. And it's an indication of the world we are moving into, that it's no longer AI as just an advisor. AI will continue to advise and it'll probably be a mighty good advisor, but AI's primary value will shift into execution. And that is why this title became what it is. And that is a philosophy behind how that title came into being. And we truly believe in that, right? Because as I said, agents are not science projects, right? We are standing behind the outcome that they generate, which essentially means we have that much conviction on this topic.
Will the AI agents in Genpact report to you?
AI agents in Genpact do report.
The digital employees are reporting to you, not to line organizations, let's say HR or legal or finance or stuff like that.
So in Genpact's case, since we are a service provider, right, we can divide this into three buckets, right, in terms of ownership. We are a client zero for agents ourselves, right? So our own finance, procurement, HR, etc., use AI, right? Use agentic AI. They report to the various functions, right? So the CIO enables it, but you should think about the CFO as the one owning the accounts payable agents working in his. Then there is a custom built side of our business, right? The bespoke business, where we have a data and AI practice, and SAP practice, and so on. The CTO owns the agents. Like I have a colleague, Sanjay Puri, right? He takes care of that. On the product-based business, which is what I take care of, those agents that we deploy are mine, right? So there are three buckets in which we do this. It would be exactly like how if we hired somebody and they work for the CFO versus we hired somebody and they work for the global agentic AI officer. We are proving the same model with digital labor as well, that we are treating agents on the same parity, right? On who owns the responsibility for that. So if an agent that misbehaves in the CFO's office should be disciplined by the CFO, and an agent that misbehaves in the CIO's office should be corrected by the CIO, right? Much like two humans.
Very interesting. Something, as I said, is a topic of big discussion. Now, Vijay, you said just now that agentic AI is not a science project at Genpact, and you also just now talked about the record-to-record suite, agentic financial solution that you have developed, yeah, for accounts payable suite. Tell our listeners what it took you to go from concept to production grade deployment. Generally, people don't talk about what it actually takes. So tell our listeners who are dealing with trying to figure out, what should be the use cases, etc., and how did you get it?
Yeah. So obviously, first thing to do is make a business case, right? On where is accounts payable as we know it today, right? So typically, as we know it today, people email you invoices. It comes via EDI, or it gets mailed to you. There are many ways in which invoices come to you, right, from different vendors. Then you need to check the invoice, verify it against a PO if it was a PO based invoice, and then there is goods receipt, right? As in the inventory shows up, you need to verify this against the goods receipt. And if all three matches, then you pay. And then you have to make sure that like duplicate payments did not happen, and so on, right? And then somebody needs, and obviously this is not always the happy flow. Oftentimes some data is missing, so you need to reach out to the customers, to the vendor, and get some information. This is the rough scope of what um, a traditional accounts payable process should encompass. Now, we could say that all ERPs do this, and it has been done for many, many years. There are a lot of things that are in that messy middle that people don't talk about. A good example is invoices are all not systematically printed by every vendor. There's a lot of disparity in that, right? So, a discount that applies to every line in the invoice could just be captured as another line in that invoice. And a human user will realize that, oh, this isn't a discount that applies to every line above it. A machine has no intelligence because it's pretty tough to write if then else logic to figure that out. Handwritten invoices are actually a tiny majority of invoices. So like, we can even say that, oh, what was the big deal? I don't need handwritten invoices. If 10 of them come in a year, some human being can take a look at. That's not where the real challenge is. The real challenge is the printed invoice will have handwritten comments on it. So, which makes it super duper complicated. No ERP will directly process it, right? Because the ERP has no way of understanding what this handwritten thing is. So, there are a lot of these corner cases that, unless you are in this business of processing invoices for decades, you will not know what is the reason for the inefficiency in the process. We have that knowledge, right, that we have built up on a from a long period of time. So we map out the happy flow of how things happen in systems of record as it exists. Then we map out everything that the human user does, and then we find what are the special cases. The special cases are the secret sauce, right? So yes, Genpact have a lot of understanding of what these last mile difficulties are, and that last mile difficulty is what makes us special. Last mile difficulty is what made us special in the previous 30 years as well. That codified knowledge that we have built up over a long period of time is what makes us train our agents better, because everybody can train agents on their own data. But that only solves one third of the problems. You need the process intelligence and you need the tacit intelligence that is stuck in people's brains. Unless those three things come together, you can't do what we are trying to do now, right? This is the reason why we can productize and a lot of others cannot, is for that reason that we bring all three together, and we have that knowledge that we have developed over a long period of time across multiple industries. So we know the nuances of how payables work in healthcare versus life sciences versus retail versus banking, right? So all these nuances are what people typically miss, and that is what it takes to get the full value out of AI. Now, if you only have data and you have the technical know-how to go about it, you will still get some efficiency. It will anyway be better than what you have today. You just won't be able to deliver as much efficiency as if you had um, the data process and the tacit knowledge all together.
So, process knowledge, as you argued uh, somewhere, Vijay, is that there is no artificial intelligence without process intelligence. And that you said that AI projects fail not because of technology, but they fail because of enterprise debt in processes and data. Now, when you're looking at a client, how do you audit their process maturity before agreeing to deploy agentic AI? And when you do, what do you do when the diagnosis is worse than what the client had expected?
When we originally started, that evaluation was fairly manual because we already have a very mature process of checking out a client's situation, because we have been in this business for 30 years. So what we do now is actually much more sophisticated. Now we ask agents, right, our own agents, to do this analysis, and we can look at existing documentation, org charts, logs, and so on. We can also have users type in answers to surveys, or failing which they can just speak, right? So we'll ask them, our agent will ask them a question, and they can speak a response, and we can analyze from that. So we'll make it super easy, and then agents will come out with a list of recommendations for our solutioning team. Okay, this client is fairly mature and do these five things, and that's how you build the case. Or it will say that, oh, there is zero maturity in terms of implementing AI, so we need to first spend some time workshopping with the client on changing the basic business process itself, to convince them before we attempt, because most of the clients, who have been there for a long time, there was no concept of an agent in the past, right? So those workflows were all optimized for a different reality. Now that we have a more sophisticated way of handling it, the maturity is not that high. We will do some advisory work upfront in making sure that we gain that alignment, because without that, there is no value. Just tagging on agents to what you already have, you will get some value, but it's not incrementally high that no CFO loses sleep over that, right? So you're not going to make, see, who wakes up in the morning wanting to do 5% improvement? 50% improvement, you will get C-suite attention, right? So that is how we address it.
Firstly, what is your perspective on OpenClaw for the enterprise?
OpenClaw as a development paradigm, absolutely brilliant, right? I use it as an engineer. I love it. The challenge is agentic AI being so new, the security, data privacy kind of issues hadn't been thought through upfront. So this is a quick and dirty way of getting something done for like personal productivity, right? I mean, a lot of people shy away from agentic AI thinking that it is super sophisticated and so on. No, vast majority of the things most people can do just fine, right? So OpenClaw can do things like handle your emails and calendar and so on just fine, like zero issues, right? So as a development paradigm, it's a step in the right direction. In the enterprise context, however, we have to hold it to a much higher standard, right? Because enterprises need regulated entities, and you have somebody else's life and money at stake, right? So you have to be a lot more careful. But there are other paradigms that have now been built on top. So, like NVIDIA came out with Nemo, and Cisco has an open source project called Defense Claw. Those things are plugging the holes in OpenClaw in terms of making it more secure, sandboxed, and so on, right? So we limit the damage of what AI can do. And there are lots of things like that, and this is why I'm a big fan of spending some portion of your budget in terms of headcount and budget and so on, for experimentation, because these things have all come out just in the last few months, right? Like Cisco's Defense Claw just came out, right? Just 2 days ago or a week ago. Um, Nemo Claw has also been there from the last GTC conference, right? So you don't stay up, and this is why I was saying, right? It takes at least 8 hours for me, and I don't even code for a living anymore to stay on top. So this experimentation is super duper important. Experiment with OpenClaw on your personal machine, and understand the construct really well. And then for the enterprise, do it responsibly, right? So use the additional paradigms that are now available that lets you do all the goodness of OpenClaw, but with enterprise guardrails, right? See, now that OpenClaw has introduced a new paradigm, everybody else will build on that. This is how software always gets developed, right? You just need one breakthrough. The incremental progress will happen by itself, right? You just need to stay tuned to the community that develops it so you can watch how this progresses.
One of the guests that we had was the chief AI officer of one of the, I would say, top two cybersecurity companies in this country or maybe the world. And I asked him what keeps you up at night, and he said rogue AI agents. You are the agentic AI officer. What is your perspective on that? And he was saying rogue AI agents within the enterprise, not from externally, but he was saying a lot of rogue agents uh, happen also within the enterprise. So, what are your thoughts about that?
You cannot overstate that risk. Rogue agents can do all kinds of damage. So, which is why narrow use cases are way better than wide use cases for AI till we develop very sophisticated enterprise controls, right? You have to define the jurisdiction for an agent and absolutely not allow that agent to do anything else. So, one of the simplest ways to think about it is agent autonomy should not mean that it is unsupervised. Just because an agent can do something doesn't mean that you should allow it to do something. When you allow it to do something is when like Amazon's data center goes down and those kinds of things, right? Somebody goes and deletes a root file or something, right? Crazy things can happen. So you have to define policies really well, and this is also a place where we should learn from other branches of technology and other branches of AI as well. Most of the agents are based on models, right? LLMs, and consequently have probabilistic outputs. But many of the decisions that enterprises do are very deterministic in nature, right? You either can do or you cannot do. So, which means coupling a probabilistic system with a deterministic system, like an if then else kind of hardlined policy, which is what that symbolic AI, the first round of development in the AI, which did not pan out, but it will make a comeback now because you need both to make it work, right? So you need the LLM based deep learning approach to be compensated or the risks mitigated by symbolic AI and some deterministic logic, right? All these things need to come through. And I am a big fan of right tool for the right job. I don't necessarily subscribe to this idea that AI should do everything. AI doesn't have to do everything. AI should do what AI is good at. Other technologies should do what they are good at. So that's how my thinking on this is. But security is by so even if security is not the problem, rogue agents can cause damage in other ways too. A good example is tokens, right? So if you let an agent talk to another agent, for example, and you don't put any controls in place, they can keep talking to each other and burn up a lot of tokens just like that. A simple solution would be a circuit breaker that says, hey, after 5 attempts, stop. If you are not thoughtful, this is why personal usage versus enterprise usage need two different approaches. In enterprise, think about two agents can do this. What if 200 agents are doing it? Security might not be the only reason that this is a problem. There are also reputation risk type problems, right? So you might let your agent negotiate with a vendor, which is all fine, but the agent has probably no sense of nuance. So at some point, it could damage the relationship with a very strategic vendor. And that's a good reason why um, we should put in control so that beyond a certain limit, it should transfer the onus of that negotiation to a human who has better judgment, right? So, this defining the jurisdiction of agents need to be done with absolutely a need to do basis and not be wide. And same thing with assigning security credentials. We should not think about agents like humans, thinking that, okay, good judgment will prevent this agent from doing bad things. No, you should assume that the agent will do something bad. So, give it the absolute minimum privileges that you can get away with, right? And enforce a zero trust way of working.
So restrict the jurisdiction. I think that's what you're saying, Vijay. Yeah, that I think is a good point. Uh, Vijay, talking about standards and protocols, A2A and MCP are now the, so to speak, the plumbing of the multi-agent architecture currently. And you have drawn a direct analogy to the microservices era, where elegance led to operational complexity that took years to manage. What would it take to get ahead of the microservices mistake in agentic AI? And is the enterprise world actually doing it?
Maybe the damage is not already done, and hence why I sound that warning periodically any chance I get, right? Because anything worth doing, the human instinct is to do more of it and get to a stage where too much of it is becoming an even bigger problem, right? That's what we found with microservices. It's not just microservices, it's also the concept of data lakes. People dumped all kinds of data. Eventually, it's not like the cost of storage was not zero. Cost of storage was going down, but it was not zero. And at a certain volume of data, you have to ask that question on, why am I dumping all this data? Is there any value in that, right? So just because something is possible doesn't mean that you should go overdo it. I'm pretty convinced that somebody or the other will take the stance that let's create as many agents as possible, create the sprawl. A good way to think about is like a CEO or the president of the US. So the president of the US has so many secretaries who work for him. Pretty chaotic to think about whether this, the president has enough time and energy to keep tabs on what each secretary is doing. To keep the president organized, there needs to be a chief of staff, right? So who keeps it organized for the president to spend his time wisely on where it's needed. That concept needs to come into agents as well, which is not there today in a mainstream way, right? So when I think of productized solutions, I think of that concept, right? That there needs to be some kind of a governance that decides how many agents are good enough. And this is also why having a business case upfront and then validating your agents or your agentic architecture against that is a better way than trying to build it from scratch for technical elegance alone. Because technical elegance, all architects, we all have a view of the ideal world, but then that ideal world needs to be benchmarked against something. Is there utility, is the question. That utility is better described in a business form.
Vijay, towards the end of our conversation, we have a lightning round of questions. This is for our a social media team. They love this. Our TikTok audience loves this. So it's basically either or kind of answers. You ready? Vijay, agentic AI in 2026, is it a revolution or is it an evolution?
Evolution, for sure.
Okay. MCP or A2A?
Both. They serve two purposes.
Closed source or open source?
Open source for innovation.
Human in the loop, is it a safety net or is it a bottleneck?
It depends on what we do it for. When carefully done, it's a safety net. Don't do a good job and you have too many human interactions. That just means that you're not using agents sufficiently well. So there is a balance that you need to strike.
Blockchain for AI provenance, finally or never? You wrote something about it.
Finally. Provenance is super important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Enterprise AI in financial services, is it ahead or is it behind healthcare?
I think ahead. Definitely ahead.
The word hallucination for LLM errors, is it a dangerous understatement or is it a charming euphemism?
A dangerous understatement, for sure.
AI replacing software developers, is it overhyped or underestimated?
The way it is today, I would say overhyped.
The Khosla prediction, and you've written about this, BPO will be extinct in 5 years. Possible or fantasy?
Complete BS. Not even fantasy, complete BS.
Mark Zuckerberg said he's building an agent to assist him or be the CEO. Would you do something like that, Vijay, for yourself?
80% of what I do, I'm absolutely happy when agents catch up to that to offload that. there will always be a higher order quality of work that a human can and should do, which should stay with the human. What would happen is that 20% will just keep increasing, right? And then the next round, the AI should come and catch up with 80%, and humans should just keep increasing. That is how I think progress will be.
Agent swarms. Yes or no? What do you think of agent swarms? That's a big buzzword right now.
Yeah, agents are a necessity, just the way it works. It's a necessity.
Great. Vijay, this has been really an illuminating conversation. And I say this, as someone who spends a lot of his time talking to enterprise AI leaders. What I really appreciate about the way you think is that you bring an engineer's perspective and instinct and the operator's discipline to a space that is really flooded sometimes with vision statements and PowerPoint and hype. You really have given our audience a clear-eyed view of what agentic AI in production actually looks like. From process intelligence, prerequisite, to security architecture, to infrastructure. You made the case that most consequential AI work is happening inside finance departments, accounts receivable teams, and compliance functions of global enterprises in places that a lot of AI talent never looks at. They're looking at Silicon Valley or in Menlo Park. So thank you again for taking the time. This has been fabulous. I had 20 other questions, but that will be part two, Vijay. It has been a great to have you and for our audience. Thanks so much.
I appreciate that, Sanjay. Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for tuning in to the Chief AI Officer podcast with Sanjay Puri. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you thought. And share it with someone curious about the future of AI. Join us every Friday right here on the CAIO Podcast as we share more stories and insights from the leaders shaping what's ahead.